Good evening and welcome on into Capitol Tonight. I'm Tim Boehm. As always, we hope you and your family are doing well. Tonight, we're bringing you my exclusive one-on-one interview with Senator Tom Tillis. Senator Tillis surprised the political world this summer when he announced, after a public battle with President Donald Trump over the big, beautiful bill, that he will not seek re-election next year. I met up with the senator back in Cornelius. That's where his political career started, to find out more about his decision and those tense conversations with President Trump. All right, can you take us behind the scenes of your thought process, at least over the last 9 months in particular, about whether or not you were going to run? I've heard, you hired campaign staff earlier this year, you were raising money, but I'd heard through the grapevine that you were still sort of, I don't know whether the waffling's the right term or not. Where was your frame of mind in the last 9 months over
I
this?
called it confirmatory due diligence. I made it clear to my donors, my supporters, my staff, that I didn't take going into a $600 million business transaction lightly. That's roughly what they expect the Senate race to be in North Carolina. So I had to be sure that I could raise the money. I had to be sure that the Republican organizations would be behind me and contribute. You know, if it's going to be $600 million, then you can pretty much assume $350 million of it would be for the Democrat and liberal interest. About $250 million would be Republican. I needed to raise about $50 million, so I had to convince myself that the financial foundation was there. That was one piece. The other piece was the political foundation. You know, were we going to transition into a governing unit up in D.C. under President Trump's leadership? Were we going to pursue issue sets that I thought were consistent with the sort of profile we need to win in a purple state like North Carolina? And all those factors were going into my decision-making process. And you know, I'd told some people it would probably be in the September timeframe, but I felt compelled to think in terms of what happens if I don't run. What risk does it create for our Senate seat? And that's a very heavy burden, and that was probably forcing me to try and get to yes, but I was only going to get to yes if all of these other things lined up properly. And then we had H.R. 1 come before us, and I had a disagreement with the president, and I felt like that disagreement was going to create a lot of uncertainty in the governing foundation question of my confirmatory due diligence. So I thought that at that point in time, I should just tell the president, if he felt like this policy was his priority, and he felt like this policy could win the day in North Carolina nationally, then he needed to find somebody who could sell that policy, because I couldn't.
Meaning if you ran, Medicaid expansion went away, that would be an issue, a liability for you in the campaign, particularly against Roy Cooper?
Well, I think it's a number of factors. Look, I did this independent estimates. There's nobody, including the White House, have ever pointed to a fallacy in our estimates. They haven't pointed to an assumption being wrong. And so I stand by that. And having been speaker in a fiscal crisis, I know what it's like to come up with a $2 billion shortfall. You know why? Because I came up with a $2 billion shortfall in the first 6 months of me being speaker. And it was not easy. We fixed it. And most people didn't think we would, as a bunch of rookies, you know, governing for the first time in majorities in the House and Senate, but we fixed it. So I have to say that a unique experience told me that $2 billion or $2.6 billion a year for 10 years was a big challenge to surmount. Now I'm trying to work on doing the best we can to help the legislature and help the Congress navigate through that.
People point to the WAPO op-ed that you did about the emergency declaration and then voting for it, but there was that spat with the president, although it wasn't public, and then of course the Hague-Seth vote, back and forth on that, and then the last vote. Was it clarity you needed basically about being able to run who you need to be?
No, because the one thing that I think my staff will tell you is I'm going to be who I am, period. I don't ever get into who I need to be posture, because that's inauthentic, and that's what's wrong with Washington and state capitals. I'm going to be who I am. And if that product isn't what people want to buy, then they need to buy something else. So, no, it was more a matter of how do you negotiate the political landscape when you're going to be at odds with this impending health care policy that I believe is very, very threatening to Republicans. And it's what concerns me the most. It's almost a mirror image to what I observed in 2009 when Obama was trying to sell the Affordable Care Act long before it was ever passed. We became a majority, and I became the second Republican speaker since the Civil War because the party that controlled Washington in 2009 and 2010 made a bad health care decision. Not so much the what. Maybe we did need to expand health care coverage and do all that, but the how was awful. I feel the same way about H.R. 1. I don't mind the what. I mean, what people are trying to do are conveniently forgetting that I was for the House proposal of the health care for Medicaid, $800 billion savings, work requirements, volunteering, all of those things that they're selling today, I was for. I'm not for the additional $200 billion that have created the economic burden that I think states are going to have a very difficult time managing.
It's weird. You know, we're sitting here at the lake, so it's weird to ask you a question like this in some ways, but what is it like being at the center of this and talking to the President of the United States? What are those conversations like?
Well,
as much as you can say.
You know, I think it's interesting. You know, it is amazing to, and I'm no different than probably at least 70 or 80 of the senators. It reminds me, sorry, I'm going to turn that off. Most of these people are natural people doing the same thing when they have the luxury of being home. There are a few that probably carry the same persona that they have in D.C. all the way up until they're with their immediate family, and then hopefully they're normal people then. But D.C. has a way of changing a lot of people, but most of the people when they get back home are doing the same things.
What were those conversations?
Maybe not in the woods as much as me, maybe not doing all the other crazy things I do, but at least getting out of the park.
What, as much as you can tell me though, what are those conversations, were they like with the president?
Even that last, well, I've had a conversation subsequent to that, but the conversation when I told the president that it was time to find my replacement, because I was not going to change my posture. It would mean that I'd have to take a public position that was absolutely counter to everything that I knew on the healthcare policy. They've all been pleasant conversations. I mean, he may drop an F-bomb, I may drop an F-bomb, and that's because we use that language, you know, in discussion with colleagues or others maybe. But we've never really had a cross discussion in that way. And frankly, it was the first time that I've ever had a discussion that prompted a social media post. And it was a social media post that told me, look, if you think you're going to go down the path of public pressure, you found the wrong guy. I respond to flexes, whether it's somebody in an airport coming after me or the President of the United States the same way. If I have a principled basis for my position, you're not going to change it. I don't care who you are.
So that social media post, was that kind of that moment that you knew?
Yeah, it was about 10 minutes later. I said, now would be a good time to find my replacement. And about 10 minutes after that, he said he'd be seeking interviewees for the role. A lot of people think I decided to resign after he posted that. I actually told the president it was time for him to get started, so I was glad that he posted immediately. He needed to get a replacement soon because Michael Whatley, who's the presumptive nominee, needs every ounce or every second of daylight to be best positioned to win next year, and I hope he wins.
You must have had a moment of clarity though. You didn't call your wife apparently.
No, I'm bad at that. It's the same thing when I quit my job to go full-time in the legislature. I told my wife that evening. So. Note to self, don't do that anymore.
All right, time for our first break. Senator Tillis has caught a lot of flack for publicly going against President Trump, including getting death threats. Coming up, we'll continue our conversation, hear more about those threats and the impact they've had on him and his family. Welcome back to Capitol Time. I'm Tim Boehm. Tonight we're bringing my exclusive one-on-one interview with Senator Tom Tillis about his decision to retire from Congress at the end of his term. Senator Tillis has gotten pushback for his occasional stances against President Donald Trump, but he says that pushback has gotten extreme, going so far as people threatening the lives of him and his family. We talked about the impact those threats have had on him and how they factored into his decision.
Let's talk about threats for a little bit. Have you listened to the voicemails that come in?
Yeah, actually some of them were so compelling I had them put in prison too, and working on a third one.
Yeah, Tom Tillis, afraid of death threats. Then get the out of office.
I would like to talk to Tom Tillis and ask him why he thinks it's okay for him to take money from this nation and it over. Why does he think that he can tell his employers to go themselves every goddamn day, all day long, and sell his goddamn nation out and his employers over? Don't he know that his employers can take a axe handle and cave his head in? And his kid's head and his goddamn grandkid's head. This piece of
Look, if you want to threaten me, you better bring it. And if we can track you down and we can have you arrested and we can put you in prison, I will show up in the courtroom if that's what's necessary to put somebody behind bars who would do that, threaten me or my family. And God forbid you come into my presence and do that.
Has it been hard? I mean, you're not the only one to face threats, obviously.
Yeah, all the time. It's very common and it's wrong. And you can't come up with some sort of a righteous threat. You're either against these sort of threats as a way to affect public discourse or you're not, which is why I feel so strongly about January the 6th. I mean, it was a massive threat to democracy. And I made it very clear that anybody that thinks anything about January 6th was justified never get confirmed in any committee I'm in for this Congress. And feel the same way. You know, I feel like if you threaten Elizabeth Warren or some of the most liberal people, you're every bit as bad as if you threaten Tom Tillis or Ted Cruz.
What about when you go to events and stuff like that? Do you remember ones in person where you've had to deal with stuff?
Deal with like people getting in my face? Yeah, poor dude at DCA airport about 3 months ago.
What happened?
He made the mistake of thinking that he could be disrespectful to me and expect me to say, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. I tore him up. And I hope he watches this interview and remembers what I did, because I don't take that. I mirror people's behavior. I know it's at odds with the idea of the golden rule, but this is the way I've worked consistently for the 20 years that I've been in public service. If you come up to me and you say, look, I really disagree with your vote on fill in the blanks. Can you give me some idea of why you went that way? We're going to have a long conversation, and it'll end when you choose to end it, because you're genuinely interested. You got curiosity. You get up in my face and say I'm some sort of a hack rhino that voted against or that prevented Ed Martin from being confirmed, which was the subject matter in DCA airport, and you raise your voice at me or you get an aggressive posture, you're going to get it right back. Just ask that guy at DCA. He lives here in Charlotte. Ask that guy in DCA how I take that kind of crap. It's the only way that what's happened, I think, in social media is that it's like the lines are blurred. I think people are now trying to use, for elected, I'll speak just for elected officials, the same sort of language and their vitriol in social media. They think from time to time they can get away with it in person. And probably for 99 other U.S. senators, they may be able to, but not this senator.
Does it wear at all? I mean, you got grandkids, your wife's at home. Does it wear on you or does it wear on them?
I think it wears more on them. I mean, the only thing I got out of that encounter at DCA was fun watching that guy's face when he didn't know what to do. And so for me, it was I was fine with it. My family, all of them. You can tell that criticism of me affects them, but I tell guys, I'm here with my babies. I'm here with my family. That conversation, that part of my life is so far away and compartmentalized. You should never worry about it. Never worry about me.
When you did that interview with Jake Tapper, you talked about, well, first of all, in your statement, you said you look forward to calling balls and strikes. In the Jake Tapper interview on CNN, you mentioned about calling out people in the White House at some point.
Yeah.
Do you want to start today or no?
No, because again, see, what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to burn the house down.